Hello everybody and welcome back. It is good to talk to all of you again, and today got a couple of somewhat random World of Warships things to kind of talk about. Um, so might as well get started, I guess. First things first, ranked. I am pleasantly surprised by this season's ranked. Um, it's been more fun, I would say, at least in the battles I've played so far, which hasn't been much. I'll be honest. I haven't played as much Warships recently. Another game has temporarily stolen my attention, but I'll get to that in a bit. But of the games that I've actually played in ranked so far, I have to say Tier 6 is just a fun tier to play. Now, this should, and I'm not sure how many of you have found the same thing, that, hey, this season's ranked is actually not that bad. I know earlier today, Notzer put out a video where he said that he's had fun in Tier 6 ranked, and I agree with him. But I think it's important for us to maybe just stop and think about what makes it fun. What is different about this ranked season and this tier of ships that we haven't had in previous seasons? And I think part of it is really the fact that Tier 6 just doesn't have some of that gimmicky crap that you run into, when you go up into Tier 7 or Tier 8. You don't have ships like the Belfast, the Universal, I can do just about everything. You don't have ships like that. You don't have, if you're talking about, let's say, Tier 8 ranked, you don't have ships like Kudasov. Hey, I can fire spam you from, comfortably, mind you, from like 17, 18 kilometers away, while being in smoke. You don't deal with those types of ships, and I find it to be a lot better to play. Yeah, not sure how many of you feel the same way, but that's how I feel. And of course, because I'm talking about this sort of gimmicky stuff, and that, I guess, is the first point of the day, which, by the way, we are going to cover a bunch of random points, is the Royal Navy battleships. There is supposed to be a new line of battleships, and if you look at all the news that have come out so far about that line, it just seems to be a mess. There's almost this constant pursuit, if that's the right way to put it, of new combinations of gimmicks to make these ships different. And that's kind of become wargaming's formula to for new ships. Is like, yep, we're gonna have a new ship, let's make it gimmicky in some kind of way, and therefore it'll be somewhat differentiated. And for those of you who've remembered like past videos that I've made, I've complained about this before, and I've actually said that in the long run this is gonna make it harder and harder and harder to actually go ahead and create balanced ships from new nation lines. And mark my words, it's going to get worse, not going to get better. Because the issue with warships is the game has, in my opinion, tried to simplify itself for the lowest common denominator. And they've tried in every way possible to avoid things that are difficult, things that are challenging, things that require the player to learn things, new things, and by doing that, they've limited the number of variables that they can play with in order to create balance, right? So this is why it's like, here's the new Royal Navy battleships, and it's just a mess, right? On top of that, of course, you guys still remember my complaints about the fact that, in my opinion, the actual, root mechanics of the game are somewhat flawed. There are things broken at the base of the game that they still haven't fixed. For me, and my take on things is that I still think that the whole range versus penetration thing is messed up. Battleships should not be doing the whole bow in angling thing. That's not how it works, right? That shouldn't be how it works. There needs to be more of a dynamic moving gameplay rather than matches where you can just be like, right, I'll just sit here behind this island and everything will be fine. Like, shouldn't be happening in this game. And I feel like by continuing to stick with their sort of World of Tanks mechanics and continue to say that this is the way we're going to go, and of course the continued desire to simplify things just to a point of zero complexity, that I think in the long run this game is going to suffer. Because every new line that they're going to try to come up with is going to be this, right, how do we combine a new series of random gimmicks to make it work? And the way I see it is that's not something that can be maintained. You know, if you keep trying to do that, it's just gonna get harder and harder and harder. I mean, hell, think about carriers for just a minute as well. I mean, first of all, that rumored carrier change has not appeared, and it's July. I mean, we're more than half the way through the year, and we still haven't seen anything there. And on top of that, you look at every new carrier release, you know, the premium carriers, and it's just every single one of them is just some sort of new gimmicky thing, you know, like. Yeah, and I complained about carrier problems for like ever now. At least that's how I feel about it. You know, I've been complaining about it since hell. I think I've been complaining about it since the alpha test. For goodness sakes, you know how CVs don't have that flexibility that they should have. That you know they don't have the ability to adapt to things on the fly. And yeah, you know, and here we are. You know, almost 2 years later, and it's still a problem, right? And speaking of complexity, right? And some people might make the argument, but all the game's too complex, people won't play it. Well, okay, you know, maybe there's a certain percentage of the population that maybe won't play the game, fine, but I don't think complexity really is a turnoff. I mean, first of all, a more complex game, like I mentioned earlier, helps because you have additional variables to create balance. You know, there's more and more things that you can do to make it so that a ship is balanced compared to another nation's ships. You know, just certain benefits over others that can create unique playstyles that way. But speaking of complexity and games where you know it is truly hard, the game that I think I've been playing the most recently, Rainbow Six Siege. I mean, there's a game that has. I mean, that is a hard game. Make no mistake about it. I mean, that is a really difficult game to play. Yes, it's a shooter, and yes, it's like an ADS shooter and everything. But if you look at the amount of variability in terms of, you know, like how to do a defense, how do you attack something properly, you know, where can you put in holes, cameras, murder holes, all those things, mirrors, all that stuff. It really makes a game very, very challenging, very complex too. And yeah, you know, a little bit intimidating for new players, you know, absolutely. But there are people who enjoy that challenge. I mean, I'm one of those people, right? I mean, for my first week playing the game, I was, wow, I don't think I've ever had my butt kicked so hard in a video game. But, you know, after what 89 hours later, you know, I'm much more comfortable in the game. Do I feel like I've mastered it? Oh, hell no. Not at all. I mean, I still feel like I have a ton more to learn, whether it's strategy or play, but still, the game just, you know, it has that complexity, and I see a lot of people playing it. You know, and so I really don't think wargaming should be so afraid to implement complexity into their game. I mean, a lot of times you're dealing with also, you know, maybe adults who do have that patience as well to learn and to master things. Okay, all right, you know, maybe not everybody, like I said, but you know, if you make the game where there is that depth, you know, I'm sure people will want to learn how to play certain ships. You know, again, take away the gimmicky stuff, put in additional values to balance. You know, in the past I've mentioned things about like, for example, like modeling, not really modeling, but sort of creating a way for ships to actually absorb damage and then repair. All classes of ships, you know, a certain amount of damage absorption, a certain amount of repair because of X amount of crew that you might have on a ship and things like that. Even that alone is 2 to 3 additional balancing variables, you know. So I really do think there needs to be more, right? Now, moving away from this, there's another thing that we're going to talk about, because the other new thing that has come out today is the whole idea of dissipating smoke based on the caliber of your guns. I mean, this is something that's, you know, this is completely like a leaked whatever, and it's work in progress and might never see the light of day. But, you know, it's an idea that they're apparently running in their heads right now. And the idea is that, you know, based on the size of your guns per gun, if you fire in a smoke, you dissipate X amount of seconds of that smoke, so the smoke timer becomes shorter. And it's mainly, I think, targeted at larger ships. So think like heavy cruisers or battleships. And I think they're trying to prevent those ships from camping smoke. So let's see. What am I a fan of? I'm a fan of the fact that they don't like that whole smoke firing thing. By the way, we really need to kill that Leander, and I'm glad I nailed that shot. But anyways, okay. Back to what I was talking about. I like the idea that they're not a fan of that, and they do want to change it. So I'm okay with that. However, I feel like, again, the change is too much of that, like, sledgehammer approach. You know, like, here's a small problem that we could fix, but hell, let's just apply a giant global change to something that I don't think is really all that necessary. If I was to tackle the same exact problem, like, how would you minimize smoke firing, and how would you make it so that battleships and cruisers and stuff like that don't really, or heavy cruisers in particular, can't really, you know, sit in that smoke and abuse the crap out of it, while at the same time continue to allow ships like the Royal Navy cruisers to benefit from it? Because think about it this way: if the change goes in like the way it is right now, and, you know, like, it enters the live server right now, I mean, what's to stop a battleship player from trolling the ever-living hell out of a Royal Navy cruiser? I mean, hey, I'm a Montana, 406mm guns, I'll just sail into my miniature smoke, and because I don't like him or whatever, and I'll just open fire. And that miniature, which, you know, only has so many smokes, just went from having a full smoke timer to, like, nothing. Maybe, like, a few seconds on a puff. That's not what is good. That just sets the game up for massive amounts of just troll behavior. It's not an elegant approach, you know? And again, mind you, that's happened on more than one occasion with wargaming and World of Warships. It's like, there could be an elegant way to fix it, and yet they always just go for that big, heavy-handed way of fixing something when, you know, something small, a small change could do it. So, for example, if I was given that task, and see, I forgot to talk about it, I would probably say, okay, here's what we can do. We can make it so that if a smoke cloud gets deployed, you know, the larger, you know, the guns of your ship, the more of an accuracy or dispersion penalty you suffer. Make it so that battleships should only be using a smoke as a way to get out of the line of fire, to drop off detect so that people aren't shooting at them. A battleship should not be entering a smoke cloud for the purposes of sitting there and opening fire. That really isn't a good thing. If that's what you want to change, then make it that way. Make it so that when a battleship opens fire inside a smoke, the dispersion suffers heavily. Make it so that, you know, for example, heavy cruisers will suffer maybe less of a penalty, but still a penalty nonetheless, and maybe, you know, so on and so forth, and sort of a decreasing thing, so that destroyers maybe suffer a small penalty. But let's say you don't want people to sit in smoke forever and continue to spam, right? Let's say that's your thing. And again, see, you have to make certain exceptions because Royal Navy cruisers, right? I mean, some of them kind of need that ability to sit in that smoke and spam. So perhaps what you do is you make it so that, you know, certain ships, after X number of shots, the penalty grows. Okay, maybe that could be a thing, you know. Maybe make it so that for every, you know, destroyer that pops smoke and sits in smoke and starts shooting, that after maybe, let's say, 3 salvos, you know, they suffer X penalty. After 5, it's another, you know, slightly greater one, and so on and so forth. So eventually they would have to stop, you know, stop firing for X amount of seconds, let that penalty bleed off, and then start firing again. Maybe that could be a solution. Once again, what that would have done, and again, like I mentioned earlier, it's not going to be perfect, but what that does, I think, is still adds some additional variables for balancing. Not gimmicks, not like, cool, let's throw on, you know, again, like, you know, current Royal Navy battleships. Like, what? You really want to put defensive fire onto a battleship right now? And you know, mind-boggling, right? Anyways, okay, so, you know, go away from that gimmicky stuff. You know, kind of go back to having variables that you can balance. You know, actual numerical things that you can balance around. Because again, like, you know, this is kind of the same feeling I'm getting from ranked this season. You know, the less of these gimmicky things that you've got, the more the game feels like, yeah, this is fun again. You know, this is how this game should be. Because I don't even really enjoy playing high tiers anymore. You know, because it's just gimmicks everywhere, right? And of course you look now and you just go, look at these battleships, you know, these new Royal Navy ones, and they're just struggling and struggling and struggling to try to get them right. maybe it's time for Wargaming to re-examine the way they want their game to go. Maybe it's time for them to say, right, folks, maybe we actually got this wrong. Maybe the game is flawed based on our current approach, and maybe we gotta go fix some things. Hell, maybe it's even a good idea to create like a test server. Like make a sandbox server, take some of these crazier suggestions that I've made over the years or whatnot, and put them into a sandbox server, and tweak around with it. Bring back some of the old things that we had back in the day as well. Maybe that whole buoyancy bar, that could be something. Maybe some ships have better, watertight compartmenting or something. That would be better against torpedoes. I don't know. Additional things to create balance that's based somewhat in reality. Maybe that is what's needed to make warships great again. Anyways, folks, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Aside from all that, folks, take care, have yourselves a good day, and I'll talk to all of you again really, really soon.